Story 1. This one is a small victory, but it was super satisfying for me, so I wanted to share it. I worked for a large international accounting firm with offices all over the country. Our boss, whom I'll refer to as Karen, was well liked until she became the boss. She was the type who smiled in your face, but only cared about her position and looking good in front of the higher-ups. It was all about the numbers, even if what we had to do to achieve those numbers didn't make sense. So here's the story. My team, consisting of about 12 people, was primarily based in the London office. However, once a week, as per my contract and everyone else's, we were required to work in a remote office far from London. This place was miserable, a building in the middle of nowhere, with only one tiny corner shop for snacks and located next to a motorway. The closest place to eat was a 15-minute drive away. We all hated it, but it was only once a week, so we dealt with it. When Karen got promoted, her sole mission became cutting costs. She implemented everything from stopping overtime to telling us there was no stationary budget for pens, instructing us to take supplies from other teams. She even limited us to one meal during social drinks and made comments when someone chose a more expensive option, for example. "Are you really choosing that? It's pricey. I'm not sure we have enough budget for it." This was despite the fact that all other teams went out for large, fancy dinners with unlimited drinks. At one point, Karen decided that the miserable location should be our primary office, and she wanted us all to go there 4 days a week instead of just one. All but one of our team members lived in London. This meant, for me, a 2.5-hour journey one way instead of just 1 hour. After a few months, this really took its toll. The assistant manager, who was a friend of mine, mentioned to me that Karen had said in passing that this office was less of a cost on our team's budget than the London office. What a shock. I decided to speak to Human Resources HR to see what my options were, perhaps get an exception. Well, it turns out we had a policy that anything over your normal travel hours to the closest office location to your home could be counted as working hours. This meant the extra 1.5 hours each way would be considered working hours. So, I could arrive at 10:30 am instead of 9 am and leave at 4 p.m. instead of 5:30 p.m. also. If trains were delayed or cancelled, that time would be included in my working hours. This happened often since this place was in the middle of nowhere, with infrequent trains, so I often arrived at 11:30 and I forwarded the emails with HR to Karen and explained how I would be complying with this policy. She agreed, but in a meeting, she tried to tell me this was an exception for me and that I should not tell anyone else. Well, I told everyone else. Soon, we all began complying with the policy. This meant we spent less time in the office and productivity dwindled. Karen frequently mentioned this in meetings. I would often respectfully point out that it didn't make sense to force us to travel to this office and the negative effects it was having. I was the main one speaking up about this. A few months later, Karen told me I could go back to working 5 days in the London office. But again, she said this was a special arrangement for me, that she appreciated me and was making accommodations only for me. She also said she would tell everyone I had special circumstances that allowed me this arrangement and to keep our conversation confidential. I honestly think she just got fed up with me pointing out how our productivity was lower only because she made us travel there 4 days a week. Of course, I complied, but the team noticed I wasn't with them, and let's just say, it caused a bit of a stir. I didn't say anything, but they figured it out themselves, no special circumstances here. Slowly but surely, one after another, my colleagues started joining me in London, getting their own special arrangements with her. Eventually, it was just Karen and the only other local colleague at that office, while the rest of us were in London. We all had a good laugh about when she would cave. It took a few weeks. Then we got the email that our permanent location going forward would be London 5 days a week, and the one local employee to that terrible office would work from home and come in once a month. It may have happened anyway, but I'd like to think that my speaking to HR and finding that policy at least had a hand in getting us moved back to London. As for Karen, I could go on about so many stories involving her, but I did eventually leave for other reasons directly related to her. Unfortunately, she is still in the same position at that company. However, I do enjoy seeing her checking my LinkedIn profile from time to time and hopefully noticing that since I left, I have gone from a junior position to the same level as her. Story 2. In 2008, I was newly married. I went to pick up my daughter after a difficult encounter with my husband the previous day during the pickup. We had just discovered we had suffered a miscarriage that afternoon, so we wanted to get my daughter and head home. My daughter was just over 1 year old at the time, so I had to physically pick her up and carry her. Although she could walk, it was easier to carry her to the car, and my ex-boyfriend began yelling awful things. He called me a nasty name and accused me of being unfaithful for getting married so soon after our breakup. We had broken up 2 years prior, before I even knew I was pregnant with our daughter. He also said I needed to get some sort of control over my chaotic lifestyle. I was an assistant preschool teacher and was taking college classes at the time to become a lead teacher. My husband was standing at the back of the car near the trunk as I turned to put my daughter in. Of course, I had to get my own jab in. My ex-boyfriend's mom is a total Karen. She's difficult and entitled in every way imaginable. My ex-boyfriend was ranting about how horrible I am as a person, and I turned and said, "At least I wasn't raised by an entitled, difficult person. Shut up and leave me alone." I turned back around to buckle my daughter into her car seat when I suddenly heard a commotion behind me. My ex-boyfriend and his father attempted to rush my car while my back was turned. My husband stepped between us and began recording on his phone. My ex-boyfriend's mother called the police, claiming that my husband attempted to assault my ex-boyfriend. But because my husband had recorded everything, they got in trouble. I ended up filing a restraining order because, even with the police present, my ex-boyfriend attempted to charge at me with a tool in his hand. They were changing a tire on his car when I arrived. A week later, my ex-boyfriend was supposed to meet me near a fast food restaurant known for its golden arches to pick up our daughter for a 6-hour visit, as that was all he was permitted during the first stage of the restraining order. The pickup time was scheduled for 10, and I got there at 9:45 and checked in with the officer who was to monitor the exchange, a wonderful sheriff's deputy from that town. We sat outside the restaurant, talked, exchanged stories about our churches. He had grown up with my mother, I later found out, and he even bought me an iced tea and my daughter a juice. We kept watch, and when my ex-boyfriend didn't show up by 10:30, the sheriff's deputy called him to inform him that, because he didn't show up, he was forfeiting his time with our daughter. He instructed me to go ahead and leave since I had a long drive back home, 45 minutes one way. About 20 minutes later, I received a call from the sheriff's office. They asked where I was, and I told them. They asked why I didn't wait for my ex-boyfriend to pick up our daughter, and I informed them that the deputy had dismissed me because we had waited 30 minutes past the scheduled pickup time. They said they would confirm with the deputy, but to have a good day. I thanked them. Something was going on because I later got a phone call asking me to return to the drop-off location so my ex-boyfriend could have the limited time left in his visit with our daughter. I informed the deputy that we were already home, and as it was just about noon, I was preparing lunch and putting my then 1-year-old down for a nap. The deputy stated he understood, and I heard screaming in the background. The sheriff's deputies called me again later that day to tell me that, due to an incident, they were requesting a restraining order on behalf of me and my daughter against my ex-boyfriend's mom as well, but they didn't go into detail. Our hearing was 2 days later. I sat in shock as the allegations were read, knowing I hadn't committed any of the acts being stated. My lawyer quickly informed the judge that I was not the person who committed the said acts. It was indeed the mother of my ex-boyfriend. Apparently, I had missed a lot. When the deputy called me the first time from the office, it was because my ex-boyfriend's mother stormed the office, demanding that I be arrested for kidnapping, claiming that I wasn't at the designated meeting location for the exchange, and that she couldn't call me because of the restraining order which, at the time, only involved her son. Then, when the deputy and I had gotten off the phone the second time, my ex-boyfriend's mom went wild. She punched the protective glass between the deputy and herself, screamed that she was going to call the mayor, demanded to speak with the head sheriff, and even tried to punch a sheriff for not immediately issuing a warrant for my arrest for kidnapping. She had to be placed in handcuffs and put in a holding cell to calm down. She threatened to harm me in my sleep, with great detail on how she could do it and get away with it. She even told the officer that she would love to see my child hurt the way I was hurting her precious baby boy. We were 22 at the time. She told the officer that she knew I would play dirty games and that I always get away with my nonsense before asking for a Bible so she could pray for the demons plaguing the corrupt sheriff's office. She finally calmed down 6 hours later and was permitted to leave, but was told she would be watched and arrested if she attempted any contact with me. 3 officers testified that I was abiding by all laws and was cooperative. They also expressed concern that if my ex-boyfriend's mom was near me or anyone else, she might not be able to control herself from having more violent outbursts. I was granted a restraining order and full custody for 6 months. My ex-boyfriend would get visitations as normal every other weekend, but my husband was the only person allowed to pick up and drop off my daughter, and my ex-boyfriend was to have no contact with me except via email. My ex-boyfriend's mother was not allowed within 50 feet of me or my daughter during this time and was ordered to attend anger management courses to try to become a better human being. My ex-boyfriend's entire family was upset. He lived with his mother, so he had to move in with his grandmother to exercise his visits and had to provide proof of his change of residency to the courts before his visits could begin. In case you were wondering, the anger management classes didn't do much. She's still as entitled and difficult as ever. Story 3. This happened about 2 years ago while I was living at my friend's place. His place wasn't in the best part of town, so thefts occurred all the time. Most of these crimes were met with a sucks to be you attitude from the police, who would then create a report and forget the incident entirely. One Thursday morning, I woke up early to a call from my roommate, who was heading to work at 5, and he explained that the detached garage had been broken into. The thief had entered through the window and stolen a bunch of items, including Milwaukee drills, motorcycle jackets, and the receiver and subwoofer from one of those surround sound systems in a box package deals, but they left the speakers scattered around. Saying I was angry is an understatement. I work hard for my things and have no intention of replacing them just so someone can sell them for a very small profit. For the next 4 days, my focus was entirely on this, and you'll see why shortly. I knew the chances were slim that I would ever find my stuff, but it couldn't hurt to look for it on the common online sales platforms. I used eBay, searching local sellers only, and set up alerts on Craigslist, a very handy feature. I also told my roommate to keep an eye on Craigslist since he had a little more time. Fast forward to Friday, and my roommate calls me up to say he thinks he found our stuff on Craigslist. I pull up the ad, and sure enough, there it is. This not-so-bright individual had taken all the items he stole from us and put them into a single ad in the barter section of Craigslist. He even included the model numbers, but not the serial numbers, making it very easy to identify. The giveaway was this cheap surround sound system for which he only had the receiver and the subwoofer. A quick search revealed that this particular system is only sold as a package. You can't buy the components separately, so this was definitely our stuff. I called the police, thinking the case was closed, but guess what? They didn't care that I found this stuff on Craigslist. After about 20 minutes of complaining on the phone with non-emergency services, they asked me what I wanted them to do. I said, "Send a car over here. I want to speak with someone directly." So, they reluctantly sent a car with a very nice officer. She was genuinely nice. I'm sarcastic, but she was really nice. She ran the number associated with the Craigslist ad, and guess what? The guy had a record a mile long and had been arrested about 10 times for theft. With this break in the case, I thought I was home free. But nope, the cop couldn't do anything. "The investigator needs to take care of this," she said, and then left. I called the investigator, who didn't work on Fridays. I asked who I could speak with, so they forwarded me to the investigator's team line, where no one answered at all. I tried again on Saturday and learned that investigators don't work weekends at all, so I'd have to wait until Monday before I could talk to my investigator. It's a good thing crime doesn't happen on weekends. Otherwise, cops would be in trouble. So, I called on Monday, but the investigator, who seemed to drag his feet, was out sick. At that point, I was done trying to call them. I drove to the police station and demanded to speak with an investigator. I mentioned the situation and the name of the guy in the Craigslist ad to this new investigator, who knew him very well and had arrested him on a couple of occasions. The cop was confident that the police could now help me since I had already done all the work. Finally, the cops told me to arrange a meeting with this guy and let them know when and where. So, once again, the work was on me. And I had to meet this guy? Thanks, police. I texted him a few times with no response. Then I called him and joked around, expressing interest in a variety of items, most of which were mine but a few that weren't. I didn't want to raise any suspicions by simply asking for the things from one of the victims. I told him I was Christmas shopping. I then said I was from out of the area and asked him to pick the location, and he listed off a few places, one of which was a grocery store within eyesight of the police station. I chose that one and laughed to myself at how this was turning out. I called the cops, let them know the deal was on, and when and where it was happening. They said they would be in an unmarked car and that I should take my wallet out as a sign for them to swoop in and make the arrest. So, I pulled into the parking lot, saw no cops, and waited. I thought the guy was a no-show when he finally showed up 10 minutes late. My heart was pounding at this point. I got out, met the criminal mastermind, and shook his hand. He proceeded to pull out my stereo, then my drills, and a few other odds and ends. Before I could even get my wallet out, a gold Taurus sped in, and out popped 3 cops with guns drawn, who quickly cuffed the guy. When this happened, I just turned around and walked away for a second while they put him in the car. The lead cop asked me if this was my stuff, and I said yes, it matched the previously provided, very detailed description I gave the police. All the while, the guy in cuffs was yelling that it was his stuff. Finally, the cops got a warrant for his apartment, found the rest of our stuff, and a few other people's belongings as well. I had all my things back by the following Wednesday. The thief received 1.5 years in a state penitentiary for his efforts. I sometimes get fixated on things, and he was unlucky to have stolen from someone who didn't just claim renter's insurance. Story 4. So, this story starts a little while back when I had a run-in with a guy named Connor. It was nothing too serious, but he tried to pull something on me at the restaurant where we both worked. Luckily, I got away before he could do anything, but it left me pretty shaken. A few of my friends at the restaurant were really mad about what happened and wanted to go after him. I told them to be smart about it because, honestly, Connor wasn't worth getting into trouble over. I did make sure to warn the other girls at the restaurant about him. Most of them listened and kept their distance. A couple of them thought he was cute and figured it was just a misunderstanding on my part. That changed pretty quickly when Connor tried to pull something similar on another girl from the restaurant. Thankfully, she also managed to get away from him before things got out of hand. After that second incident, some of the guys at the restaurant were even more determined to mess with Connor. They felt like he needed to be taught a lesson. About a month after the first incident, they decided it was time to strike. At our restaurant, employees could either park behind the building or out front by the street. Most of us parked out front, and that's where Connor always parked his big truck. 2 of the guys had the night off work, and one of them managed to get his hands on a big speed jack, the kind they use on race cars. While Connor was busy working, they decided to have a little fun. They removed all 4 of his tires from his truck, put them in the truck bed, and left the truck up on blocks. It was late when Connor finished his shift that night, and it was just him and the manager left in the restaurant. When he went out to his truck and saw what had happened, he was furious. He called the police, and they actually came to the restaurant. But since nothing had technically been stolen, the officers just kind of laughed it off and asked him who he had ticked off. Connor ended up calling his dad to come help him out. Apparently, they had a real father-son bonding moment as his dad taught him how to put the tires back on his truck. After that, Connor started parking his truck around the back of the restaurant. But that didn't stop the guys from messing with him. In fact, it only led to the next prank. Connor had this habit of wearing really tight jeans. I'm talking about jeans so tight that it was uncomfortable for him to keep his keys in his pocket. So, he always put his keys on the employee's coat rack while he was at work. One evening, while Connor was busy working, someone decided to have a little fun. They took his keys, moved his truck from the back parking lot to the front parking lot, and then put his keys back where he had left them. When Connor got off work, he went out to the back parking lot, but his truck was nowhere to be found. He immediately panicked and came back inside to call the police, convinced that his truck had been stolen. 2 officers showed up to take the report. They got the details of the truck, and while one officer stayed to finish the report, the other went out to check the parking lots to see if any other vehicles had been tampered with. Sure enough, the second officer found the stolen truck parked right in the front lot. They assumed Connor had just forgotten where he parked it and told him to quit wasting their time. Connor wasn't too happy about that and ended up calling the officers a few names, which almost got him arrested on the spot. The whole situation seemed to be getting under Connor's skin, and it was only a matter of time before things escalated. Less than a month later, it finally happened. Connor did get arrested, and it happened while he was at the restaurant. Turns out, Connor had been involved in some shady stuff outside of work, and the police were on to him. They came into the restaurant one day, cuffs ready, and took him away right in front of everyone. It was quite the spectacle, and none of us were surprised. That was the last we saw of Connor. After everything that went down, the restaurant was a lot more peaceful. The girls didn't have to worry about him anymore, and the guys who pulled the pranks on him got their laughs. All in all, Connor got what was coming to him. Story 5. Back in 2014, I was hired to work on a cruise ship. I started off as a restaurant steward, clearing tables and mopping floors in the buffet. After a few months, I was promoted to back waiter and was moved to the main dining hall. I quickly caught on to the back waiter duties, and my front waiter, whom we'll call Bert, not his real name, took notice of my hard work. After a couple of weeks in my new position, Bert told me that it was only a matter of time before I got promoted to front waiter, and he wanted to start training me for the role. So, he asked me to shadow him when the next group of passengers was seated in our section, so I could observe how he handled his front waiter duties. Unfortunately for us, the next group of passengers seated in our section was an 8-top of difficult customers. Bert and I welcomed them to the restaurant. They were friendly at first, and the head customer, an older, heavier-set man, asked, "There's a show in the main theater we want to see that begins in about an hour. Is it possible for us to get our dinners, eat them, and get to the show on time?" To which Bert replied, "Absolutely, depending on what you order." After looking over the menu, the group was ready to place their order, and 5 out of 8 of them wanted the New York steak, the one menu item that took the longest to cook. Bert informed them of this and explained that if they all ordered the New York steak, there was no guarantee they would get their dinners fast enough to eat and still make it to the show on time. Bert suggested alternative dishes that we could get out much quicker, but the group refused to change their orders. Bert read the order back to them, and they all confirmed that it was correct. This is important for later. Bert handed me the ticket, and I ran back to the kitchen to assemble their meals. My first stop was the New York steak counter, and to my horror, there was a long line of waiters waiting to drop off their tickets. Just so you know, this ship has a maximum capacity of about 3,500 passengers. The main dining hall seats nearly 1,000 people, and I had never seen the New York steak counter as busy as it was that night. It seemed like everyone and their mothers were ordering the New York steak. I would have to wait at least 20 minutes just to drop off my ticket, and who knows how long after that until the cook got to my ticket to cook the steaks. With the wait time and juggling the other tables Bert and I had to serve in our section, I knew there was no chance the group could get their meals and make it to the show on time. So I rushed out to Bert, told him the estimated wait time on the New York steaks, and that he needed to inform the group that they should change their order if they wanted to make the show. Bert relayed my message to them, and when he came back to me, he said they still refused to change their order. Bert shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, we did all that we could to try and convince them to change their order so they can make it to the show they wanted to see, but they refused to change it. So if they miss their show, they miss it, and it will be their fault." I did my best to get their meals out as quickly as possible, while also attending to the other tables in our section. Sure enough, the group missed the start of the show, and they were furious. They demanded to speak to the restaurant manager and fabricated multiple lies about the poor service they received, claiming that we were lazy, incompetent, and purposely dragged our feet. They even exaggerated how long they had been waiting for their meals, saying it was over an hour since they received their appetizers when it had only been 50 minutes since they were seated in our section at most. Bert and I explained our side of the story to the manager, who believed us, said he would try to calm the customers down, but told us to do our best to get their meals out as quickly as possible so we could get them out of the restaurant. Finally, the meals were ready. I brought them out to the customers, hoping this would be the end of the ordeal. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Two of the women called Bert and me back to the table and complained. "Our steaks are rare. We ordered well done." Bert and I huddled. He looked over his notepad where he had written down the 2 steaks as rare. He asked me if I heard them say they wanted rare steaks when we took their order earlier, and I nodded yes. Bert approached them and said, "Ladies, my back waiter and I both heard you 2 say you wanted rare steaks. I read the order back to you, and you both said that the order was correct." But the customers responded, "We've never ordered rare steaks in our lives. You 2 messed up. Take these back. We don't want them. We want brand new steaks." So Bert handed me the steaks and told me to go back into the kitchen and order 2 well-done New York steaks on the fly, which is restaurant lingo for it's an emergency and we need this order right now. I rushed back into the kitchen, but the New York steak counter was still busier than ever. I rushed to the cook and asked for 2 well-done New York steaks on the fly, and the cook angrily yelled at me, "No one is getting anything on the fly tonight. You get to the back of the line and wait your turn like everyone else." At this point, I began to panic. It was going to be at least another 40 minutes, if not longer, for the 2 customers to get their well-done steaks. In an alternate reality, this would be a perfect situation for a story where I made the customers wait the near hour-long time for them to get their new steaks as requested. But I didn't want Bert to deal with these customers any longer than he had to, and the restaurant manager did tell me to do my best to get them their meals as quickly as possible so we could get them out of the restaurant. So, cue the plan. The customers wanted well-done steaks, so they were going to get well-done steaks. There were microwaves in the kitchen. I flipped the steaks over to hide the previously made cut marks, threw them into the microwave, and nuked them until they were well done. I brought them back out to the customers and prayed to every deity I could think of that they wouldn't realize what I had done. Fortunately, they didn't. The customers ate their meals in complete silence, giving Bert and me the dirtiest looks while doing so, and stormed off when they were finished. Once they left, I told Bert what I did. It took him a moment to process what I told him, and he finally said, "Under normal circumstances, I would be very upset with you, and I strongly suggest that you never do what you just did ever again. However, these aren't normal circumstances. Those people were rude, unreasonable, and dishonest, and they didn't even tip. So you know what, forget them. I'm glad they missed their show." In the nearly 2 years I worked on that ship, I dealt with many difficult customer stories for another day, but I'll never forget this one. Just a reminder to everyone reading this story, please be kind to your waiters. Story 6. I have an Indian friend named Raj, who is 27 years old. Before moving to the United States, he had a group of friends, and they went on a trip together. Along with Raj, there were 2 other friends and a couple we'll call Mary and John. Mary, who was Hindu, came from a very conservative family where she couldn't marry or date outside her religion and caste. John, on the other hand, was a Christian and had several registered cases of assault against him. During the trip, Mary's family saw a photo we took and were furious. However, they didn't know who she was in a relationship with. To cover it up, Mary lied and said she was with Raj. Her family did a background check on Raj and ended up liking him a lot. Raj went along with it because Mary assured him she would tell them the truth soon. A few days later, Mary's cousin called Raj and alerted him that Mary was planning to run away with John. The plan was for Mary's parents to believe she had run away with Raj, which would lead them to come after him. Realizing the danger, Raj immediately collected everything he had on Mary: pictures of her with John, details of her past relationships, and more, saved it all on a flash drive, and went to Mary's house. He showed her parents everything and explained how she was planning to run away and frame him. After that, Raj cut off all communication with them and didn't follow up on what happened after he dropped that bombshell. Edit. I want to address some questions from the comments. When I mentioned assault charges, I meant that John had been arrested for assaulting others, not Mary, as far as Raj told me, and getting into fights, and he was granted bail. I honestly didn't realize how much worse the situation could have been for Raj, and I believe he didn't either. After reading the comments here, it seems like Raj's life could have been in serious danger. Edit 2. For those worried about Mary's safety, after reading all the comments, I showed this post to Raj. We worked together. I asked him what happened to Mary, and he told me that the last thing he knows is that she married John a little while later. Mary's family allowed her to marry John to save themselves from embarrassment in their community, and John converted to Hinduism in order to marry her. Edit 3. This all happened very quickly, almost within a day. Mary asked her cousin for some money and had to explain why she needed it. Mary's cousin advised her not to go through with her plan and refused to give her the money, but Mary was determined. Realizing what this could mean for Raj, Mary's cousin contacted him through someone almost immediately and informed him of what was coming. Raj had to act quickly. Within an hour of getting the call from the cousin, he went to Mary's parents,